I want to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully, because I've been sitting on this story for almost 8 months now, and every time I try to explain it to someone who wasn't there, I lose them around the third paragraph. They either think I'm exaggerating, or they think I'm making the whole thing up for attention. I'm not. I was standing 6 feet away from her when it happened. I saw her face. I watched her hands shake. I watched a woman who had processed over 400,000 interstellar travelers without blinking, without pausing, without showing a single flicker of emotion. I watched that woman freeze like something had reached inside her chest and squeezed. All because of a name. A human name. 3 words on a battered, standard-issue galactic travel document, stamped with the red border seal of Earth's outer frontier registry, and she went pale. Or whatever pale looks like on a Vorthian. I'll explain that part. I'll explain all of it. But you need to understand something first. You need to understand what that checkpoint was, what that morning felt like, what kind of being checkpoint commander Zelharon was before any of this happened. Because if you don't understand who she was before, you won't feel the weight of what she did. And the weight of it was enormous. It still is. Helix Gate 7 is not the kind of place you visit on purpose. Most of the travelers who pass through it are in transit, connecting from outer rim freight lines to inter-system passenger vessels, or clearing customs before boarding the long-haul colony ships that run the Kessler Proxima route. It's a layover port, essentially. A waiting room the size of a small moon. Most species treat it the way humans used to treat airports in the 2100s, as a necessary inconvenience, something to be endured with a bag of overpriced food and a sense of mild resentment. The port itself sits in geosynchronous orbit above Proxima Centauri b, the big one, the terraformed one, at roughly 412 kilometers above the cloud layer. From the observation decks on the port's outer ring, if you can get a window seat, you can watch Proxima Centauri itself rising over the planet's curved horizon about every 40 minutes. It's rust-colored, smaller than our sun but closer, and it throws this particular quality of orange light across the port's hull plating that makes everything look like it's perpetually at golden hour. I mention this because that morning, the morning I'm telling you about, I remember noticing the light on my way to my shift. That rust-orange glow coming through the observation corridor, catching the dust motes floating in the recycled air, and thinking, today looks like a calm day. I was, as it turned out, catastrophically wrong. Inside the port, it doesn't matter what time of day it is or what star is rising outside. The internal environment runs on a 26-hour rotation cycle calibrated to the galactic standard chronometer, and Proxima Concourse, our concourse, runs 3 full shift cycles per day. Early shift, core shift, and late. I worked core shift 7 years running. 7 to 19 galactic standard. The concourse itself is about 1.5 kilometers long, curved gently inward because of the port's ring geometry. 600 individual processing booths arranged in 40 rows, organized by species classification and transit clearance tier. The ceilings are high, 12 meters at the apex, because some of the species coming through need that altitude. Keth travelers, for example, have a wingspan that makes them physically uncomfortable in anything below 10 meters. You learn these things. You learn a lot of things working core shift. The sounds of the place are something I still hear sometimes when I'm trying to sleep. It's not loud exactly. It's dense, layered. You've got the low thrumming of the port's atmospheric processors, constant and low-pitched enough that after a week you stop hearing it consciously, it just becomes part of the background texture of the air. Then you've got the translation matrices. Those emit this high, thin whistle when they're processing complex syntax, like when a real traveler tries to explain their documentation in their native tonal language, and the matrix has to work overtime rendering it into something the processing officer can read. And then the footsteps, hundreds of thousands of species with hundreds of thousands of different gaits, different numbers of limbs, different relationships to the concept of movement. And the combined acoustic result is something between a tide and a machinery room. You get used to it. Most of us get used to it. Row 7, Booth C, was Commander Zelharon's station. She had been there longer than I had. Longer than most of the human staff, actually. She'd been stationed at Helix Gate 7 for what the Vorthian calendar counted as 11 cycles, which translated to somewhere around 19 Earth years. In Vorthian terms, that made her old. Not elderly, Vorthians don't really get elderly the way humans do, but seasoned. Settled. Dense with experience the way old wood is dense. You could feel it when you stood near her. Vorthians are bipedal, roughly humanoid in silhouette, but that's where the easy comparisons stop. They're tall. Zell stood at about 2 meters 30 without the posture enhancement their rank insignia adds, and their skin has this quality that I can only describe as iridescent granite. In flat light, it looks gray. In the orange light of Proxima's glow through the observation corridor, it shimmers faintly, like mica in a stone face. Their eyes are large, horizontally elongated, and ringed with a secondary eyelid that acts like a polarizing filter. Zell's were amber gold, the color of old whiskey if you want a human reference. She dressed with absolute precision every shift. Her checkpoint uniform, dark navy with the silver piping of the Galactic Border Authority, was always immaculate. The rank discs on her collar, 3 silver and 1 gold, were always level. She wore no personal adornments, which was unusual even for Vorthians. Most of the senior staff had at least one piece of cultural jewelry they were permitted to display. Zell wore nothing. Her processing speed was, and I say this as someone who watched her work for 4 years, genuinely extraordinary. The galactic standard for document verification at a high-volume checkpoint is 90 to 120 travelers per hour for Class A officers. Zell processed between 160 and 190, not because she rushed. She never rushed. It was because she didn't waste motion. Every movement was necessary. Every pause was deliberate. She'd look at a document, run the scanner, receive the biometric confirmation, ask her questions in whatever language the traveler required. She spoke 47, I found out later. Most of us manage 4 or 5 and then either stamp and release or flag for secondary screening. In 4 years, I never saw her make an error. I never saw her waver. I never saw her show fear. Until that morning. The queue at row 7 opened at 0730 Galactic Standard. Zell was already at her station when I arrived. She was always already at her station. A Keth family was first in line, 2 adults and 3 juveniles, all with the wide, calm eyes of beings who had been in transit long enough to be patient about one more checkpoint. She processed them in about 4 minutes flat, including the juvenile biometric readings, which are always complicated because Keth children's biosignatures don't fully stabilize until their second molt. Then came a Vorthian diplomatic aide, young, clearly nervous, clutching a stack of physical documents that supplemented his quantum credentials. Zell spoke to him briefly in Old Vorthian. I caught the cadence of it, the way it sounds like deep breathing with consonants embedded in the exhales, and he visibly relaxed. Whatever she said eased him. Then a Emreth trader with 17 pieces of freight documentation. Then a human couple on a colony transfer permit. Then 2 Cerealian academic researchers submitting to retinal mapping as part of their extended stay approval. Then a lone Keth male, commercial transit, flagged for secondary, calmly, professionally, no drama. Standard morning, exactly like any other. I was at booth F, 2 stations over, working through my own queue. My line that morning was mostly human travelers, a mix of colony system returnees and a few frontier workers whose documents were always slightly irregular, chipped scanner chips, out-of-date photo biometrics, that kind of thing. Frontier workers never quite had their paperwork in order. It was a running joke on core shift. I'm telling you all of this because I need you to feel how ordinary it was, how routine, how absolutely, completely, mind-numbingly normal that morning was, right up until it wasn't. I checked my log later, 11:47 Galactic Standard, when the human male stepped into Zelharon's lane. Build, something unusual begins. I didn't notice him at first. I was processing a frontier worker, woman, mid-40s, returning from a 19-month rotation on one of the outer agricultural settlements. Her documentation card so worn from being passed around that the holographic seal had partially delaminated. She was apologetic about it. People always apologize for things like that, like the chip degradation is their personal failing. I was explaining how to file for a replacement card through the Earth Registry Office when I heard Zell's scanner beep. Just one beep. That's not unusual. The scanner beeps to confirm a read. It happens thousands of times a day. But it beeped and then nothing. Zell's booth went quiet. Not the ambient noise of the concourse. That never stops. But the specific small sounds of her working, The soft click of her secondary keypad, the low hum of her translation matrix processing speech. Those stopped. I looked over because I had learned over 4 years to notice anomalies in Zelharon's patterns, the way you learn to notice a hiccup in an engine you know well. She was not someone who paused between processing steps. She was not someone whose hands rested motionless on a surface. Her hands were motionless on the document scanner. The traveler on the other side of the booth glass was a human man. Average height, or maybe a little above, hard to tell through the processed glass partition, which has a slight distortion to it for security purposes. He was wearing the kind of clothes that said he'd been in transit for a while. A utility jacket with too many pockets, worn at the elbows, the kind of thing you buy for function and wear until the seams protest. Dark trousers, boots that had seen real use. A travel pack on his back that was large but evidently not overloaded because he stood straight under it without the forward lean of someone carrying dead weight. He had the stillness of someone who was used to waiting. Not impatient stillness, not the fidgety energy of someone trying to look calm, but actual stillness. Occupational stillness. The kind you see in frontier workers, in cargo pilots, in people who spend long stretches of time in environments where conserving energy matters. His face was, I don't know, normal. Not remarkable. Mid-40s maybe older. It's hard to judge in frontier workers because the UV exposure and the recycled air tend to age the skin unevenly, so you get faces that look 40 around the eyes and 60 around the jaw. Brown hair, salt and pepper at the temples. Jaw that needed a shave, but not badly. The kind of face you'd forget in a crowd. He was looking at Zell with mild patience. She was looking at his document. She was not moving. This was, I want to be precise here, approximately 3 seconds after the scanner beeped. 3 seconds is not a long time. In conversation, it's a natural pause. In document processing, where every step flows into the next with the smooth inevitability of a practice sequence, 3 seconds of stillness is conspicuous. 5 seconds passed. Then 7. I was still watching. My frontier worker had taken her worn documentation card back and was waiting for me to finish the filing instruction, but I had lost the thread of what I was saying. Zell's hands moved. Not to the keypad, not to the release stamp. Her hands lifted from the scanner surface and moved just slightly, and I recognized the gesture because I had seen Vorthians make it once before, during a diplomatic ceremony I'd been cleared to observe 3 years earlier. It's a two-handed gesture, palms slightly curved inward, held just below chest height. It's involuntary, or nearly. It's the Vorthian equivalent of an intake of breath before speech. It's what they do when they are, in some deep and unpremeditated way, shaken. I had never seen Zelharon make that gesture. Not once. Not in 4 years. I excused myself from my booth, technically a protocol violation. You're supposed to request a coverage swap before leaving your station, and I stepped into the service corridor between our rows. From there, I had a partial sight line to Zell's booth, enough to see her face. Her secondary eyelids were fully closed. Again, this is something Vorthians do involuntarily. The secondary eyelid is essentially a threat response membrane. It doesn't impair vision much. The secondary eyelid is semi-transparent, more like a polarizing filter than a full shutter. But it deploys automatically in response to stimuli that the Vorthian nervous system categorizes as significant. Intense light, sudden loud noise. Acute emotional processing. Zell's secondary eyelids were closed in a quiet, averagely lit checkpoint booth, in response to a document. I don't mind telling you that a feeling moved through me that I couldn't immediately name. Not fear, something adjacent to it. The feeling you get when you see something that doesn't fit into any of your existing categories. The human traveler on the other side of the glass spoke. I couldn't hear the words, the booth glass is sound dampened. Only the translation matrix feed comes through to external speakers, and that wasn't activated. But I could see his mouth move, and the posture of the words was easy to read. He was asking if everything was okay. Zell's secondary eyelids opened. She looked at the document again. Then she looked at him. And even from the service corridor, at a partial angle, through processed glass and distance, I saw something happen on Zelharon's face that I have tried to describe to a dozen people since, and never quite managed. It was recognition. Not the recognition of someone who has checked a document and confirmed a match. Not the procedural recognition of a border officer seeing what she expected to see. It was the recognition of someone who has heard a name she was told once was not real, and then found it standing in front of her. She came out of the booth. That alone was unprecedented. Senior processing officers do not leave their stations during active queue hours. There's a protocol for everything, for breaks, for emergencies, for equipment failure. None of those protocols involve the officer physically stepping out of their processing station and into the traveler-facing concourse during a live queue. Zell stepped out of her station. The movement was not hurried. It was deliberate, the way all her movements were deliberate, but there was something in it that was different from her usual economy of motion. Usually her deliberateness came from efficiency. This time it came from something else. It came from the kind of careful, almost ceremonial attention you give to an action you understand to be significant. She cleared the booth door. She stood on the concourse floor. And she bowed. Not a procedural bow. Not the shallow forward angle that galactic protocol specifies for interspecies professional courtesy. Not the medium acknowledgement you offer to a GBA district supervisor. A deep bow. Both hands flat against her thighs, back parallel to the floor, the posture that Vorthian cultural documentation, which I had read once as part of a cultural sensitivity training module, describes as the seventh posture, reserved for beings of extraordinary historical significance. I saw her do it. The queue behind the human man had gone silent. There were maybe 30, 35 beings in various stages of waiting, and every single one of them had stopped whatever they were doing and was now watching Checkpoint Commander Zell Haron, 19-year veteran of the Galactic Border Authority, stand on the concourse floor and bow to a human in a worn utility jacket. The human man, he didn't flinch. He didn't look embarrassed or confused. He looked, and this is the part I keep coming back to, he looked tired. Not the transit tired of someone who'd had too many layovers, something older, something that lived behind the eyes. He said something. Zell's translation matrix, which runs on external speakers during concourse interactions, was active now, and I caught the tail end of what he said in the GBA's Unified Common Language rendering. Told me protocol still requires a full scan. I'm not exempt from anything, Commander, please. His voice was quiet, even, steady the way water is steady when it's very deep. No affect in it, no performance of modesty, no discomfort at the attention. He was stating a fact. Zell straightened from the bow. She looked at him for a long moment. Her amber gold eyes, with their horizontal pupils, were fixed on his face with an expression I can only describe as something between reverence and sorrow, like looking at something you had been told was lost. "You are correct, traveler," she said in unified common, and her voice, which I had heard for 4 years in its characteristic measured, unaffected cadence, was slightly different. Not broken. Not emotional in any way that would be obvious, but different. Like a very fine instrument playing the same note it always plays, and someone who knows it well can hear that the tuning has shifted just slightly by something the instrument has felt. She returned to her booth. She completed the scan. Professional, precise. Every step performed exactly as it should be. And then, before she stamped the release approval, she looked up at him through the booth glass and said something that was not in the processing protocol. Something that had no official function. Something that she said because she chose to say it, and a 19-year veteran who processes things in under 90 seconds per traveler choosing to spend words outside the protocol is meaningful. She said, "The concourse will remember you passed through here, sir. So will I." The human man looked at her for a moment. Something crossed his face, not pride, not satisfaction, more like the expression of someone who has been handed something they would have preferred not to carry. "I'll try to make that worth something," he said. She stamped the document. He walked through. "Now I need to back up. Because I realize I've told you what happened without telling you what the name was, and the name is everything. The name is the entire story, really. The sequence of events around it is just scaffolding, context. The name is the load-bearing structure underneath everything else." After he walked through, after the queue slowly resumed its motion and the ambient sounds of the concourse reasserted themselves, and the 30-something beings who had been standing there watching gradually remembered they were in a checkpoint line and had somewhere to be. After all of that, I went directly to Zell's booth. This also violated protocol. Interstation contact during active processing hours requires a supervisor authorization. I didn't have one. I knocked on the service panel anyway. She opened it. She looked at me. Her secondary eyelids were still at a partial closure, about 40%, which for a Vorthian of her composure and rank in the middle of a working shift was significant. You saw, she said. It wasn't a question. I saw, I said. Zell, what was the name on that document? She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned back to her station and pulled up the processed record on her secondary display, which is accessible to senior officers for review purposes. She rotated the display so I could see the document scan. It was a standard Earth Outer Frontier Registry travel permit. The format I'd seen 10,000 times. Blue-white holographic border, the red Earth Registry seal in the lower left quadrant, the traveler's biometric identifiers listed in 3 vertical columns on the right side of the document face. The photograph was the man I just watched walk through. The name in the upper identification field read, immersive reshapes. I stared at it. I'll be honest with you, I didn't recognize it immediately. I felt that I should. I felt the pull of recognition, the sense that the name was connected to something I knew but couldn't locate precisely. Like hearing a piece of music and knowing you've heard it before but not being able to place where. I started. Calloway, Zell said. Her voice was perfectly level, but she was watching my face with a kind of careful attention, waiting for the moment the connection landed. Marcus Calloway, I said again. And then it landed. No, I said, not because I disbelieved it, because that's what you say when the thing that's been presented to you is too large to accept in one breath. Yes, Zell said. Let me tell you about Marcus Rail Calloway. If you're human, and you're under the age of maybe 35, you might know the name. You might have encountered it in a history module, or in one of the documentary series that got produced in the 2370s, when the restrictions on the Vega station records were finally lifted. You know it the way most people born in the 2350s know it, as history. As something that happened before you were aware enough to understand it. If you're older, you know it differently. If you were alive during the Vega Accord years, you know exactly what that name means without anyone having to explain it. Your body probably just did something when you read it, some small, involuntary thing. And if you're not human, if you're one of the perhaps hundreds of non-human beings who might one day access this archived account, then I'll tell you what the name means, and you'll have to trust me that even the dry summary of it is only a fraction of the weight of the actual thing. In 2359, the Galactic Unified Council, the body that governs interspecies trade, diplomacy, and territorial sovereignty across 34 member species, made a decision. The decision concerned humanity. Specifically, it concerned whether humanity, then 31 years into its galactic membership, still considered a junior and frankly suspect species by most of the Council's senior members, would be granted provisional sovereignty over the outer frontier territories it had settled and developed over the previous 2 decades. 12 star systems, 43 inhabited settlements, approximately 16 million human beings who had built lives in the deep outer rim. The alternative, the option favored by the Council's majority faction, led primarily by the Vorthian Collective, the Keth Dominion, and the Cerelian Academic Union, was reclassification. The outer territories would be redesignated as developing space, stripped of any independent governance, and placed under multi-species administrative control. In practice, this meant the settlements would be absorbed. The humans living there would be offered relocation to inter-system designated zones. For their own development, the Council language specified. For structured integration into galactic civilization. 16 million people, their homes, their lives, the things they had built from nothing in the outer dark. It was a vote. The kind of vote that is made in formal chambers with procedural language that keeps it at a comfortable distance from what it actually means. The vote was 41-7 against human sovereignty. The outer territories were to be placed under administrative control, effective within 90 days. Marcus Rail Calloway was not a politician. He wasn't a diplomat. He wasn't a military commander or a galactic lawyer or a species advocate of any officially recognized title. He was a cargo ship captain out of the Vega station hub, which sat at the heart of the most heavily settled outer frontier territory. He'd been running supply routes for the outer settlements for 11 years. He knew every settlement, every station, every mining platform, every terraforming node in 12 star systems. He knew the people running them the way you know people when you've delivered their food, their medicine, their building materials, their letters from family, their children's birthday packages for over a decade. When the vote came down, every official human diplomatic channel scrambled to mount an appeal. The council gave a 90-day window for appeals. It was, by most estimations, a formality. The council's decision-making protocols made successful appeals extraordinarily rare. What happened in those 90 days has been called, in the historical record, several different things depending on who's doing the calling. The Vorthian historical records, which were the first external species records to acknowledge it at all, roughly 15 years after the fact, call it the Callaway intervention. The Keth academic literature refers to it as the human acceleration. Some of the human documentary productions call it the 90 days. Callaway called it, in the one interview he gave, just going to talk to people. What he actually did in 90 days was travel to 14 different species' home worlds, stations, and deep space installations. Not through official channels. He didn't have access to official channels. He went in his cargo ship, the same ship he'd been running supply routes on for 11 years. He didn't go as a diplomat. He went as what he was, a cargo captain who knew the outer territories, who knew the settlers, who knew what was actually in those 12 star systems and what it had cost to put it there. He went and he talked to people. Scientists, philosophers, traders, artists, military officers, religious leaders, parents. He talked to Vorthian community elders in their home cycle gatherings, which humans are not ordinarily invited to attend, and no one has been able to fully explain how he got those invitations. He talked to Keth Dominion ship commanders on active patrol routes. He talked to Cerealian archive masters in the deep stacks of their generational libraries. He was not impressive looking. He was not a great orator in any recorded sense. He had no special technology, no political leverage, no threat to offer, and no bribe to extend. He just talked, and apparently the people he talked to listened. The council appeal vote was held on the 89th day of the 90-day window. It passed, 38-10, with 3 abstentions. The outer territories were granted provisional sovereignty. The 16 million settlers stayed. The settlement stayed. 12 years later, the provisional designation was removed, and full sovereignty was confirmed in what became the Vega Accord, the foundational document of the current human galactic framework. Marcus Rael Callaway attended the Vega Accord signing as a cargo captain. He brought 3 crates of outer settlement agricultural produce to the ceremony, because he'd been scheduled for a supply run and he didn't want to leave the order unfilled. The historical photograph of the signing shows him in the background, in his utility jacket, holding a cargo manifest while heads of species sign the document. Afterward, the Galactic Unified Council offered him a formal diplomatic position. 3 species offered him honorary citizenship. The Vorthian Collective, whose elders had been among the people he'd spoken to during the 90 days, and who had shifted from the majority position to abstention in the appeal vote, a shift that changed the outcome, offered him a seat on their cultural council. He declined everything. He went back to his cargo route. He was supposedly retired. That was the official story, that Marcus Callaway had stepped away from the frontier run routes 5 years ago and was living quietly somewhere in the intersettled territories. There had been no public appearances, no interviews, no recorded travel in any official log. And yet there he was, on Zelharon's scanner, with a standard-issue Earth Outer Frontier Registry travel permit, passing through a routine checkpoint at Helix Gate 7 at 11:47 on a course shift Tuesday morning. "Do you know why he's traveling?" I asked her. "I don't ask travelers their private reasons for transit," she said, gently but with the finality of someone quoting a principle rather than a rule. "He's cleared. His documentation was in full order. His documentation was his documentation was more in order than anyone I've ever processed. The biometrics, the stamp series, the travel permit issue date." "Yes," she said, "it was." "Why does he still travel on an outer frontier registry permit? He could travel on a Tier 1 diplomatic credential. He could probably travel on a council pass if he wanted one." Zell looked at me for a moment. Perhaps, she said, he prefers to travel as what he is. I didn't have anything to say to that. We stood in the service gap between our stations for a few seconds, and then the flow of the queue asserted itself. Someone in her line was beginning to look restless, and she turned back to her station. Vasenkov, she said without turning around. She was already reaching for the next document. Yeah, you understand now. It wasn't a question either. Yeah, I said, I understand. I went back to my station. I processed my next traveler, a young Vorthian student, research visa, clearly excited, first time off the home world, documents in perfect order, with, I'll be honest, somewhat less than my full attention. He didn't notice. Students never do. They're too busy managing their own nerves to notice the distraction of the person processing them. I got through the next hour of my shift. Then I went to the break room, poured myself a cup of whatever the machine labeled as coffee, but which the human staff had long since accepted bore only a philosophical relationship to the actual beverage, and I sat down at one of the corner tables where you couldn't be seen from the corridor. And I just sat there for a while. Because here is the thing that I had been turning over in my mind since I'd stood in the service corridor and watched Zelharon bow, and it took me most of that hour in the break room to get it sorted into something like coherent form. The Vorthian Collective had been the primary political force behind the 2359 Council vote to strip the outer territories of human sovereignty. Their elders had been the most vocal advocates for administrative control. Their diplomatic representatives had written substantial portions of the motion. Of the 41 votes against human sovereignty, 11 were Vorthian Collective votes. The same collective whose elders Marcus Calloway had somehow gotten invited to speak to during the 90-day window. The same collective who abstained in the appeal vote instead of voting against, which changed the math and changed the outcome. Zelharon was a Vorthian, 19 years at Helix Gate 7, a posting she had presumably chosen and maintained. One of the things I'd always found quietly remarkable about her was the degree to which she treated every traveler, human, Keth, Cerealian, Emreth, all of them, with identical and absolute professional respect. No favoritism, no observable bias, no hierarchy in her bearing that corresponded to species. That's not typical. Most officers have tells, small unconscious adjustments in posture or speech rhythm that reveal their internal species hierarchy instincts. We all have them. We're all shaped by the cultures we come from, and cultures have hierarchies, and hierarchies leak through even when we're trying to suppress them. Zell didn't have them, or rather she'd long since smoothed them away through discipline or philosophy or years of deliberate practice. She had watched Marcus Calloway approach her station. She had scanned his document. She had read his name. She had felt whatever she felt, whatever old Vorthian history and species memory, and the weight of 2359 and the 90 days and the Vega Accord felt like, processed through the nervous system of a being who had been, once, part of the civilization that had nearly taken everything from 16 million humans. She had felt all of that. And she had stepped out of her station and bowed. Not because her culture required it, not because the protocol dictated it, not because it would help her professionally in any way. Because she chose to. Because she is, underneath the rank discs and the precision and the perfect processing record, someone who understands what a debt looks like, and who understands that the proper response to it, even decades later, even when the debtor is just a tired man in a worn jacket asking not to be treated differently, is acknowledgement. The bow was acknowledgement. The bow was Zelharon, officer of the Vorthian Collective, veteran of 19 years of galactic service, looking at the man who had done the thing he had done and saying, in the oldest non-verbal language her culture has, I see you. I know what you did. I carry the knowledge of it. That's what it was. The rest of the shift passed the way shifts pass when you've had one extraordinary event early in the day and then have to spend the following 8 hours doing something ordinary. Everything feels slightly unreal, slightly too bright and too small at the same time. You do the work, you process the documents, you ask the questions, you stamp the approvals. But part of your mind is somewhere else, turning something over, trying to hold it in a shape you can examine. At about 1500 hours, my colleague Bren, a human, been on course shift for 11 years, knows the concourse the way you know your own apartment, leaned over from his station and said quietly, You saw the thing with Commander Zelharon this morning. It wasn't a question. I saw it, I said. What was it? Someone said she bowed. She bowed. He was quiet for a moment, processing this. Who did she bow to? A traveler. What traveler? I looked at him. Do you know the name Marcus Calloway? His face changed. He was 51, Bren, old enough. He went through the same sequence I'd gone through, the slight frown of partial recognition, the reach for the connection, and then the landing. The O that wasn't quite a word, more like a small release of held air. That was him, here. Just passing through, I said. Routine transit. Bren looked at his booth glass, and then at the middle distance, and then at me. How did she even know who he was? He must have. What does he look like now? He must be. The document had his name, I said. Just from the name, Bren said. Yeah. She bowed. Deep bow, both hands, the formal one. Bren sat back in his station chair. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, That's going in the shift log. I don't care who wrote the protocol guidelines, that's going in the shift log. It's already in mine, I said. I looked up Zell's shift log entry that evening. Senior officers' logs are accessible to other senior staff through the internal system. It's intended as a coordination tool for situations where an officer's processing decisions earlier in the day have implications for another officer's later queue, flagged travelers, held documentation, that kind of thing. Her entry for the 1147 processing of Traveler Calloway read, Transit approved. Documentation in full order. Traveler, cooperative clear, no anomalies noted, standard release stamp applied. That was all. No mention of the bow, no mention of the pause, no note of the words she'd said outside the processing script, the ones about the concourse remembering. Standard release stamp applied. As if it had been completely ordinary. And maybe that was the point. Maybe she wrote it that way on purpose because the protocol-facing record should be what it was, unremarkable, and the rest of it was hers. A private acknowledgement, between her and the name on the document and whatever history lived between them. I thought about that for a long time. I still think about it. 3 weeks after it happened, I ran into Zell in the equipment storage corridor, one of the back passages between the processing row and the administrative section, narrow enough that if two people go to pass each other, they have to turn sideways. We'd done this dozens of times over 4 years. It's a common enough corridor. This time she stopped. Not because the corridor forced it, because she chose to. Vasenkov, she said. Commander, you've been thinking about it? Again, not a question. 4 years teaches you someone's rhythms. Yeah, I said, I have. What question are you on? She asked it with a directness that wasn't unkind, more like a teacher who knows roughly where in a problem their student is and is checking to calibrate. I thought about it. Why it still matters, I said. It was 30 years ago, the accord is settled, sovereignty is confirmed, it's done, it's in the history. Why does the name on a document still, why does it do what it did to you? She considered this for a moment. Her secondary eyelids had their normal working shift closure, about 10%, just enough to function as their natural state. Amber gold eyes, steady and careful. Because the history happened to people, she said. Not to records. The Vorthian collective, my people, we moved towards something in 2359 that would have cost millions of human beings their homes. Not abstract millions. People with names and children and things they'd built. And we almost did it, for reasons that were rational internally in the language of galactic policy and species development and administrative efficiency. Rational and wrong. She paused. And then one person, one human, with a cargo manifest and a ship and no official authority whatsoever, went and talked to the people behind the policy. Not the policy itself, the people, and something changed. She was quiet for a moment. That doesn't expire, she said. The significance of it doesn't have a term limit. When I read his name on that document, I felt it the same way I would feel it if I read it in the moment it happened. Time doesn't reduce the weight of what a person did. It just changes the distance at which you carry it. I didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to add. The bow was a debt acknowledgement, she said. My people understand debt, not financial debt, The other kind, the kind between species, between histories, the kind that doesn't get paid off, only acknowledged. I acknowledged it. That was the correct thing to do. He asked you not to, I said. He said he wasn't exempt from procedure. He was correct, she said. The procedure is equal for everyone. That's what the procedure is for. But the acknowledgement is mine to give or withhold, and it doesn't interfere with the procedure. I gave it, and then I did the procedure. Both things were correct. She shifted slightly in the corridor, the signal that the conversation was concluding. You'll write about this at some point, she said. I've seen how you take notes after unusual events. I might, I said. Write it accurately, she said. Write about the bow, write about him not wanting it, write about both of those things being what they were. I will. She moved past me into the administrative section. I stood in the corridor for a moment. Then I went back to my station. 6 weeks after the checkpoint incident, I started looking into the public record on Marcus Calloway. Not the history module version, the real thing. The actual archived documents that the Galactic Record Office began releasing in batches starting around 2374. I'd accessed some of them years ago, out of general interest, but I'd never gone deep. Now I went deep. I want to tell you about a few things I found. The first is a recording, audio only, not visual, of one of the Elder Council gatherings in the Vorthian home system, during the 90-day window. The Vorthian Archive released it in 2376 with a 40% redaction for cultural privacy reasons, meaning large sections are silenced or removed, but what remains is fragments. You can hear Calloway's voice. He speaks in Unified Common, which was translated real-time for the elders in attendance. His voice sounds unremarkable, quiet. The voice of someone talking to people he respects, not a crowd he's trying to move. I've listened to the recording maybe 15 times. I've tried to find the rhetorical technique in it, the diplomatic strategy, the thing that moved the elders enough to shift their vote. I haven't found it. What I hear when I listen is someone describing things. Describing a woman named Petra Chen, who has been farming on a settlement called Redfall Station for 12 years, and who has 3 kids and a water reclamation system she built herself with salvaged mining equipment. Describing an old man named Hector Duval, who runs the medical post on a frontier mining platform, and who has not had a day off in 7 years because he is the only qualified medic in his orbital zone. Describing a young couple, Rishi and Amara, who chose the outer territories because they wanted to build something of their own, who chose hard instead of easy because they believed in the project of it. He describes these people, their lives, the specific unheroic daily reality of what they had built and what it would mean to lose it. That's all he does. He doesn't argue policy. He doesn't challenge the council's legal framework. He doesn't accuse anyone of bad faith or malice. He just describes Petra Chen and Hector Duval and Rishi and Amara. And the elders voted to abstain. The second thing I found was a letter, not a galactic record, a personal document that entered the public archive through a family donation. A letter written on actual paper, handwritten in English, sent from Marcus Calloway to a woman named Dara Kass, who was the elected settlement representative for a place called Margin Point on the Vega frontier, about 3 weeks after the accord was signed. The relevant section, I'll paraphrase because reproducing the text directly would be a copyright issue, says something like this. The outcome was not guaranteed at any point. He never believed it was guaranteed. He describes being more frightened during those 90 days than at any other point in his life, not of anything that might happen to him personally, but of the possibility of being insufficient to what was needed, of falling short of what the people in those settlements needed someone to do. He says that the fear was useful, actually. It kept him from performing, from trying to be impressive. It kept him honest, kept him talking to people instead of at them. He closes the letter by saying that he hopes he never has to do anything like it again, that it cost him something he can't quite name, and he hasn't fully figured out yet what the bill is. That was the voice of the man Zelharon had bowed to. That was the man in the worn jacket with the tired eyes who had looked at her bow and said, "I'll try to make that worth something." He wasn't performed. He wasn't armor-plated with his own legend. He was a person who had done a thing that mattered enormously and had spent the intervening 30 years carrying the knowledge of it and trying to be equal to it. No wonder he still traveled on a standard permit. No wonder he still wore the jacket with too many pockets. I want to tell you one more thing. About a month after my corridor conversation with Zell, I was processing a routine transit queue, afternoon flow, mostly inter-system commuters, light load, when a young human, maybe 24, 25, applied at my station. Student visa. Research program at the Cerulean Academic Union. Eyes bright with the specific excitement of someone whose entire life is about to change because they're about to go somewhere they've wanted to go for years. Her documentation was fine, clean, complete, properly dated. As I was running the final biometric check, she looked around the concourse, the way newcomers always look around, taking it in, and said, in the slightly odd tone of someone for whom this is still new and enormous, "Is it true that someone important came through here recently? My roommate told me she heard from someone that." "Travelers come through here every day," I said. "Every hour, that's what a checkpoint is." She looked at me. "Right," she said, "but every one of them is important to someone," I said. She thought about this. Then she nodded like it had landed somewhere useful. I stamped her transit approval. "Welcome to Proxima Concourse," I said. "Good luck with the research." She went through. I wrote this account 8 months after it happened. I've tried to be accurate about what I saw and what I didn't see, what I know directly, and what I've reconstructed through records and conversations. Some of the dialogue is reproduced from my shift log notes, which I took that evening and the days following. Some of it is from memory, and memory has its own imprecision. What I'm certain of is this. I watched a woman who had spent 19 years making herself equal and impartial and precisely calibrated. A woman who had, over that time, become one of the most respected processing officers in the GBA. I watched her read a name and feel the full weight of what that name carried. And instead of suppressing it, instead of filing it away behind the professional wall she'd spent years building, she let it surface. She stepped out of her station. She acknowledged the debt. And then she went back and did the job exactly right. That's not a small thing. Maybe it seems like a small thing, one bow, 30 seconds in the middle of a working checkpoint on a Tuesday morning. But it wasn't small. It was the whole shape of something. The shape of what it means to be a civilization rather than just a collection of species sharing airspace. To carry history without being crushed by it. To acknowledge what was almost done and what was instead done, and to hold both of those things at the same time with honesty and without theater. I think about Zell Heron's bow. I think about Marcus Calloway saying, "I'll try to make that worth something." I think about the fact that neither of them made a scene, or gave a speech, or let the moment become anything larger than it needed to be. They let it be exactly the size it was. And its size, the actual, quiet, weight of history size of it, was enormous. That's the thing about significance. It doesn't need to announce itself. Sometimes it just stands in a worn jacket at a checkpoint booth and waits for its passport to be stamped. And sometimes the person doing the stamping has the grace to say, "I see you. I know what this is. So will I." Ending line. There is a human saying that most of us in the outer territories grew up hearing, in one version or another. History is not what is written. History is what people do when no one is writing it down. Marcus Calloway went to 14 worlds in 90 days and talked to people. Zell Heron stood in a checkpoint booth for 19 years and treated every traveler the same. Neither one of them was performing. Neither one of them was trying to be the story. They were just doing the thing in front of them. The thing in front of them just happened to matter. And somewhere in Proxima Concourse's archive, filed between a Keth family's transit approval and a Cerulean researcher's student visa, on a core shift Tuesday at 11:47 Galactic Standard, there is a record that says, "Transit approved, documentation in full order, no anomalies noted. Standard release stamp applied." And then, because no archive is as complete as the human heart or the Vorthian memory, there is also this. A bow that no procedure required. A man who didn't ask for it. A quiet acknowledgement that rippled outward through everyone who witnessed it and then kept rippling, the way things do when they're real, long after the traveler had gone through the gate and disappeared into whatever he was traveling toward. Some passages leave a mark. Not on the document. On the people who were there when it happened. I was there. And I've spent 8 months trying to do justice to the size of what I saw. I'm not sure I've managed it, but I owe it to both of them to have tried.